That under that law, they even sent a United States congressman to jail for 15 years. When one newspaper in Wisconsin, for example, tried to print the truth about the pandemic, they were actually prosecuted. The prosecution was begun under that act, although it was dropped as the pandemic continued. So there was no decent source of information.
A 2017 analysis of medical journals from the period of the pandemic found that the viral infection was no more aggressive than previous influenza strains. What? You see, what killed everybody was malnourishment, overcrowded medical camps and hospitals, and poor hygiene. And it was promoted to this super bacterial infection. Super infection is what they called it. The super infection killed most of its victims, not the actual flu. 1918, folks, everyone relying on newspapers and the government, and they were being lied to.
When public health authorities are saying this is ordinary influenza by another name, the public knows perfectly well that they were being lied to. I actually think that when you come right down to it, society is based on trust. And without trust, society is going to begin to break down. And that's actually what happened. I mean, the lies were so extreme in Philadelphia at a time when the city was digging mass graves. Priests were literally driving horse-drawn carts through the street, calling upon people to bring out their dead. One of the Philadelphia newspapers said, quote, "This is not a public health measure. There is no cause for alarm," unquote. I mean, how stupid did they think people were? So knowing that they were being lied to, not being able to trust anything that they're being told or anyone in authority, people began to lose trust in each other. It was very alienating. It became every person for himself or herself, every family looking out only for themselves. And
what would have happened if they would have known how severe it was? And only until 2007 did we find out that it wasn't the flu so much as it was the censorship, the not being able to trust anyone, malnourishment, overcrowded hospitals, and poor hygiene. But nobody's talking about that. History tells us that another study conducted in 2013 used a simple epidemic model incorporating three factors to infer the cause of the three waves of the 1918 influenza pandemic. Now, these factors were school opening and closing, temperature changes throughout the outbreak, and human behavioral changes in response to the outbreak. Their modeling results showed that all three factors are important, but that human behavior was beyond the most significant of the effects.
This is a lethal threat. It is not going to wipe out civilization, but it's dangerous. We do have the opportunity to exercise some control over what happens, both to us individually and to the society and the economy. The social distancing, works, can have a significant impact on the outcome of in the course of the disease. If there is widespread compliance, then I think we can, significantly affect the course of the disease. And if there isn't, we could be in for it.
They call the Spanish flu the forgotten flu. And there's various theories of why that happened. The rapid pace of the pandemic, which, for example, killed most of its victims in the United States within less than 9 months, had pretty much zero media coverage. Additionally, the outbreak coincided with the deaths and media focus on the First World War. And then another explanation involves the age group affected by the disease. So the majority of the fatalities from both the war and the epidemic were among young adults. The number of war-related deaths of young adults may have overshadowed the deaths caused by the flu. So when people read the obituaries, they saw the war or the post-war deaths and the deaths from the influenza side by side, and particularly in Europe, where the war toll was so high. Now, the flu may not have had a tremendous psychological impact, or maybe even seemed to be kind of an extension of the war. So it was kind of forgotten. Well, it's different now. Over 100 years ago, their information was censored. And the common theme among all of that information revolves around the media, misinformation, censorship, and public trust. Yes, we have better technology. Is that good or bad? Not only is that part of the problem, is that we have become more stubborn, even less trusting of our government. And now, our news sources, this bickering, this attacking from Fox, from CNN, ABC, NBC, CBS, it's real.
more like the Swedes. But now the Swedes are kind of acting like a red state with the virus. And it's like, I don't know. I thought Sweden was great. What do you think about Sweden? What they're doing?
Well, I think what's so interesting is the coverage of it is just astounding, because they cannot get away from the narrative of this red-blue argument. Like, they can't just tell us whether or not Sweden's approach is working. They have to couch every headline. They're always saying things like, conservatives see hope in progressive Sweden. And then if you read the body of the article, it will say something like, yes, it's working, but what the right wing doesn't understand is that this culture depends upon a strong belief in the role of the state and society. In other words, they're couching the whole story as what the important thing is whether conservatives are right or wrong about Sweden, whereas that's not what's important. What's important is, is their program working or not? And I think that's been a problem throughout this crisis. We cannot excise Donald Trump and the Trump argument from anything that we talk about with this crisis, whether it's hydroxychloroquine or the WHO or whatever. And that's a real problem.
So the big debate, if you boil it all down and take away all this other BS, is what we're dealing with right now and the decisions that need to be made right now. Because let's be real, we have to open back up at some degree, and we have to do it soon. Some states are. How we do that is going to determine a lot about how we move forward. So the question is, what's the right amount of health risk in order to restart and get going with our economy? Is it 1%? 3%? How about 6%? Are we okay there? It's a three-way battle we're dealing with. How do we battle the disease while protecting the economy, while keeping society on some sort of even keel? All the while, Facebook and YouTube announcing they're going to censor us. You don't know if you're getting the right information or any information. While you have all these inconsistencies at the same time from state to state and local elected officials like the mayor of Las Vegas offering you up to be a test case. When we see people like her on national television realize she's making decisions for us, I gotta say, I'm a little more than uneasy than I was after seeing her. And don't get me wrong, the interviewer, and I say interviewer because Anderson Cooper is not a journalist. He has no formal journalistic education whatsoever. He comes from the Vanderbilt fortune. He was a child TV star and Gloria Vanderbilt's son. And at the age of 3, he was a guest on The Tonight Show. And then appearing with his mother at the age of 9, he appeared on To Tell the Truth. He played an imposter, and he was really good. And then from 10 to 13, he modeled with Ford models for Ralph Lauren, Calvin Klein, and Macy's. Now is CNN's finest constructs of journalistic integrity right there. And he has, nor will he ever be able to relate to people like you or I. He's been in Hollywood's backyard since before many of you were even born. He's a model who can read the news. For those of you who emailed me and had put him in such high regard and coddled him with compliments of integrity and journalistic pride. He's a spoon-fed information relay, nothing more. But he made himself look good by interviewing a mayor who, by all accounts, has to be one of the most underqualified, undereducated, and misinformed politicians to make a national headline ever. Unfortunately, folks, it boils down to this. You got to question everything. I know voters in Vegas right now are questioning their thoughts. And they were calling her a hero before they saw the interview. Then they were like, are we that disengaged as to not know what really is going on? Are we really that programmed to believe whatever the other guy says is just BS? This is why I say stay informed. Listen, question everything. And to say all of this is happening in an election year is troubling would be the understatement of the year. Right now, we should all really come to some sort of agreement as to how we make this election process as smooth as possible and agree on it. Because I can tell you this, these coming months as we get closer to the election are going to be some of the most uncomfortable you've ever experienced. And that'll be for all of us. I'm going to leave you with this, some perspective. An email I received from a trusted friend of my family. It didn't give credit to whomever wrote it, but it's truly a perspective I think we should all think about. It reads, for a small amount of perspective at this moment, close your eyes. Imagine you were born in 1900. Many would think that was a pretty simple time of life. Then on your 14th birthday, World War I starts. and ends on your 18th birthday. 22 million people perish in that war, including many of your friends who volunteered to defend freedom in Europe. Later in the year, a Spanish flu epidemic hits the planet, and that runs until your 20th birthday. 50 million people die from it in 2 years. On your 29th birthday, the Great Depression begins. Unemployment hits 25%. The world GDP drops 27%. That runs until you're 33. The country nearly collapses along with the world economy. If you were lucky, you had a job that paid $300 a year. Just barely $1 a day. When you turn 39, World War II starts. You aren't even over the hill yet. And you don't try to catch your breath if you lived in London or most of continental Europe. Bombing of your neighborhood or invasion of your country by foreign soldiers along with their tank and artillery was a daily event. Thousands of young men and women joined the army to defend liberty with their lives. So between your 39th and 45th birthday, 75 million people perish in the war. At 50 years old, the Korean War starts. 5 million people perish. At 55, the Vietnam War begins. 4 million people perish in that conflict. And then on your 62nd birthday, it's the Cuban Missile Crisis. A tipping point of the Cold War. Life on our planet as we know it could have ended. Sensible leaders prevented that from happening. Now in 2020, we have the COVID-19 pandemic. Thousands have died. It feels pretty dangerous, and it is. Now think of everyone on the planet born in 1900. How do you survive all of that? When you were a kid in 1985 and didn't think your 85-year-old grandparent would understood how hard school was or how mean that kid in your class was. Yet they survived through everything that I just read you. Perspective is an amazing art, refined as time goes on and very, very enlightening. So let's try and keep things in perspective. Let's be smart. We are all in this together. Let's help each other out, and we will get through all of this. Until next time, Americans, stay healthy, stay informed, question everything. This is Chat on Demand, keeping it real.